So, Dmitry, the public perception or the layperson's perception of a nuclear explosion is completely different when that nuclear explosion takes place underground. When we were first informed that there's a possibility of a nuclear explosion taking place in Manhattan, we dismissed that as nonsense. That can't happen. There's no mushroom cloud, there's no radiation, there's no destruction. And now, having explained that it's underground, all of the energy and all of the things that we associate with a nuclear explosion take place underground. And it's only an associate effect that causes the demolition of the World Trade Center buildings.
Yes, it's probably a psychological problem why the people cannot believe that it was a nuclear event, because they expect to be something as in Hiroshima, burned bodies and burned buildings and a lot of radiation. But in reality, as you can see, it was just an ordinary nuclear explosion underground. So the effects were corresponding, and it is well known to specialists anyway.
Well, we've also got the timing issue, because the South Tower's hit at 9:16, the North Tower at 8:46. The Pentagon struck at 9:37, discovered to be a thermonuclear device. At 9:59, the South Tower is collapsed or demolished. So that would be well within the comfort zone of a decision being made and the button being pressed.
Yeah, it was quite a short time in between.
And then at 10:27, half an hour later, the destruction of the North Tower. So there's a kind of cause and effect to your story.
Why?
There is a cause and effect. The Pentagon officials look at this thermonuclear warhead, the Doomsday plane takes off, the Cheyenne Mountains are closed behind the Joint Chief of Staff, and a decision is made to demolish the World Trade Center because of the possibility of a thermonuclear device being in the upper floors.
Yes. Actually, they didn't consider it as a possibility. They were sure about it. That's at least what the FBI officials told them. They were absolutely certain that there were nuclear devices on planes. As also, you can see from
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
The chief of safety of the fire department of New York City told me that shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there, and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told by Albert Turry, who is the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He told me that just moments ago.
Please listen carefully what that person says.
One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
Just listen.
According to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building, planted in the building, planted in the building, planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane, may have been on the plane, may have been on the plane, may have been on the plane.
It's about two nuclear devices. And this is the chief of safety for New York Fire Department. He talks about certain devices built in the tower, and another explosive devices were in the planes.
May have been on the plane. May have been on the plane.
This is the answer. So he confirms that there were devices planted into buildings and devices in the plane.
Leading us to only one conclusion.
So yes, that is exactly corresponds with what the FBI officials told me.
Dmitry, I want to turn to other events. Just around that crucial 8:45 to 10:30 time on the morning of September the 11th. If only the twins had an inbuilt nuclear demolition scheme, or there were some more skyscrapers that had something to do with the engineering ideas of Mr. Lazou that you referred to, you have one suspicion. The first 9/11 victim telescoped at 9:59. Less than only 3 minutes later, at 10:02, it was ordered to immediately evacuate the Sears Tower in Chicago. It wasn't ordered to evacuate the Empire State Building, the Trump Tower. It wasn't ordered to evacuate any other building, the Sears Tower in Chicago. Why would that be?
Because you know that this nuclear demolition scheme of the World Trade Center was not only implemented in the World Trade Center, but also in the Sears Tower in Chicago. So once the American officials were obliged to press the red button to demolish the World Trade Center, they were obliged to evacuate the Sears Tower, because it might follow the same thing, and they don't want to kill people.
The Sears Tower in Chicago has been evacuated, and we continue to check on the circumstances there. The Pentagon, the State Department, and the White House have been evacuated in Washington as well. The President has said, we can show you now what happened just a few moments ago at the Trade Center. Watch the building to the left, to the back of those two buildings. This is just a few minutes ago. We don't know if something happened, another explosion, or if the building was so weakened it just collapsed. But
is it true then that you knew that there was a demolition scheme for the Sears Tower?
You know, I can tell you honestly, I knew it for sure only about the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. But I have the rumors. I heard the rumors about the Sears Tower as well, but in the form of rumors only.
So you suspected there was a scheme in respect of the Sears Tower, but you didn't know it?
Yeah, I can't be sure, but it looks like.
Looks like it.
Yes, because this explains everything. And what I heard, that Chicago building code was similar to New York building code. And unless you provide the demolition scheme, you cannot build a skyscraper in Chicago.
But your testimony is graphically clear. Let's understand it. You knew about the Twin Tower schemes.
Absolutely.
From
I
your
knew it from my
position.
service. Yes.
But you only assumed afterwards there was one in the Sears Tower.
I heard the rumors, but I heard the rumors of that.
Okay. Thank you. Dmitry, there must have been other governments, the British government particularly, that would have had a clear understanding of what's taken place, because their recorders would have shown a 150 kiloton explosion in Manhattan.
Of course.
Okay. So let's turn to where you refer to seismic reports in your book. The seismic record at Palisades, New York, 34 kilometers north of the World Trade Center disaster, shows on the Richter scale at exactly 8:46 the impact of the supposedly the first plane, 0.9. The second impact, 0.7. The first collapse, 2.1. The second collapse, 2.3. And the World Trade Center Building 7 collapse at 0.6. Help us with that, because this presumably is an independent authority that would have produced these seismic records.
You know, nothing is really independent, especially when it concerns these kind of circumstances. As you can see in this seismogram, the two peaks that's supposed to represent the two nuclear explosions under the World Trade Center during the time of their collapses, they, first of all, they were not natural. They are probably handmade just by the pen and the ruler. They are just too perfect to be natural. The second thing, that they purport to represent the two explosions of the portable nuclear devices, less than 1 kiloton or about 1 kiloton. That is by the seismic magnitude. Because the 150 kiloton of nuclear explosion would produce much bigger peaks than these two. Another proof that this is lie, that the third nuclear explosion under the World Trade Center 7 was not depicted here as a nuclear explosion. So this seismogram corresponds to the so-called intermediate level of the truth, which claims that the World Trade Center was demolished by the nuclear devices of Osama bin Laden.
So this is a story for the patricians.
Yes, and even though it does not correspond perfectly, because the story for the patricians, as according to the El Mundo newspaper, claims that the 3 mini nukes were used.
Yes.
And this one shows only 2. It does not want to show that the World Trade Center 7 was collapsed by the same kind of mini nuke. So it's just a kind of bogus evidence.
But if this seismic report were accurately reflecting 3 underground 150 kiloton nuclear explosions, what level on the Richter scale would that
More than 5.7.
More than 5.7.
And this is, as you can see, 2.1 and 2.3.
Okay. Coming back to the brave firefighter that gave testimony only a few days ago, who was in the Marriott Hotel receiving orders, when he ran outside to go to the South Tower, he felt the ground shaking underneath him. He looked up and the South Tower was collapsing. He ran to join his colleagues along by the North Tower. Half an hour later, he testifies that the ground was shaking like a train running by underneath, and the North Tower collapsed. And he escaped with his life, thank God. In the event that a 0.1 kiloton nuclear explosion took place underneath or in the South Tower, and it made, on the Richter scale, an impact of 2.1, would that cause the ground to shake?
No.
At what level on the Richter scale would the ground shake like a train going past underneath?
5.5 and above. 5.5 and above.
Thank you.
Rose Arce, one of our CNN producers, is on the phone. Rose, what do you got?
I'm about a block away, and there were several people that were hanging out the windows right below where the plane crashed, when suddenly you saw the top of the building start to shake, 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 top of the building start to shake.
So the impact of what you claim is clear.
So you asked me your question, how would the foreign government treat the available seismograms?
Okay.
They will treat them in the same way, they will misinterpret it. So those people whose profession is to interpret the seismogram, they will say that, look, it doesn't correspond to the 1 kiloton portable nuclear devices, at least 150 kiloton, or about that. So their superiors tell them that, please, keep shut your mouth, and they will just make the discovery, corresponding the official version of events. That's easy.
Also were trapped by this, and here is the second tower that's coming down, and this was a similar situation. This defies belief.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
Right now we want to go to our affiliate NYW reporting on this as we speak.
The little girl in his arms. Did you see what happened, sir? Did you see what happened? What happened?
Well, I was in the past train and there was a huge explosion sound. Everyone came out. A large section of the building is blown out, around like the 80th floor.
Was it hit by something or was it something inside? It was inside.
Because it looked out, everything was coming out.
No second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in another building, not second plane. That was a bomb. Who said the second plane?
That's what we're told, the second plane. We saw it on television.
Everything.
The design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. To ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. The design of planned attacks on buildings, the design of planned attacks on buildings, the design of planned attacks on buildings, the design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. To ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. To ensure that the explosives went off, to ensure that the explosives went off, to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
Let's deal with another feature of what took place on the morning of September the 11th, and another claim that you make in your book. You claim that there were no planes, yet there are 4 flights full of people. And you claim in your book that they were probably shot down.
I believe that 2 planes that's supposed to hit the World Trade Center Twin Towers, allegedly, they were just stolen, they were empty, and they were just sunk in some way in Atlantic Ocean, just to hide the evidence.
Okay.
And then their digital images were used for manipulation to create the story for that these 2 planes hit the World Trade Center.
I'd say the whole takes about, looks like 6-7 floors were taken out. And there's more explosions right now. Hold on, people are running.
Hold on just a moment. We've got an explosion inside.
The building's exploding right now. You got people running up the street.
Okay.
Hold on, I'll tell you what's going on.
Okay, just put Winston on pause there for just a moment.
Okay, the whole building just exploded some more. The whole top part.
Okay.
The building's still intact. I'd say the whole takes about, and there's more. I'd say the whole takes about, looks like 6-7 floors were taken out. And there's more explosions right now. Hold on, people are running.
Winston, hold on just a moment. We've got an explosion inside.
The building's exploding right now. You got people running up the street.
Okay.
Hold on, I'll tell you what's going on.
Okay, just put Winston on pause there for just a moment.
Okay, the whole building just exploded some more. The whole top part.
Okay.
The building's still intact.
Don Daler, ABC's Don Daler, who is on the scene. Don, just give me some description again of what you can see now.
What we're seeing, it appears that there is more and more fire and smoke enveloping the very top of the building. And as fire crews are descending on this area, it does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
I did not see a plane go in. That just exploded. I did not see a plane go in. That just exploded. I did not see a plane go in. That just exploded. I did not see a plane go in. That just exploded.
We just saw another plane coming in from the side.
You did. That was out of absolute.
Yes, and that's the second explosion. You could see the plane come in just from the right-hand side of the screen. From the right-hand side of the screen. From the right-hand side of the screen. You could see the plane. You could see the plane.
We want to share with you what we do know. We're getting scattered information coming in about the planes that have crashed and which planes have crashed where. Here's the latest that we have. American Airlines identified the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center as Flight 11, a Los Angeles-bound jet hijacked after takeoff from Boston, 92 people aboard. That's one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. And also the other plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, American Airlines Flight 77, it was hijacked while carrying 64 people from Washington Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. And United Airlines says that its Flight 93, a Boeing 757 on the way from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, crashed about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh with 45 people on board. And United Airlines says another of its planes, Flight 175, that was a Boeing 767 bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 65 people on board, also crashed, but United does not say where that plane crashed. The other plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, American Airlines Flight 77. The other plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, American Airlines Flight 77. The other plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, American Airlines Flight 77. And United Airlines says another of its planes, Flight 175, that was a Boeing 767 bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 65 people on board, also crashed, but United does not say where that plane crashed. And United Airlines says another of its planes, Flight 175, that was a Boeing 767 bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 65 people on board, also crashed, but United does not say where that plane crashed. So that is four planes that we are talking about.
We are hearing from eyewitnesses who were in the area at the time that they saw an aircraft slam into the south side of the Pentagon this morning. There was one eyewitness who said that there were no markings at all on the side of the plane. And let's take a look at some of the VO from when it just happened. There was a tremendous fireball, and we are hearing from eyewitnesses who were in the area at the time that they saw an aircraft slam into the south side of the Pentagon this morning. There was one eyewitness who said that there were no markings at all on the side of the plane. No markings at all on the side of the plane. No markings at all on the side of the plane. No markings at all on the side of the plane.
When it comes to the other two planes, one of them was later assigned to Pentagon, and the other one was, as you say, that Flight 93. I think these two planes were genuinely shut down by the U.S. government in panic, which followed the September 11. I have no proof of it, of course, but it looks like.
Well, the only evidence we've got is in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where United Airlines Flight 93 crashed, so we're told, at 10:06 on that morning.
The last hero wasn't found on the ground, but rather in the air of United Airlines Flight 93. Before the plane crashed in Pennsylvania, passenger Jeremy Glick told his wife by cell phone that he and his fellow passengers had a plan to resist the terrorists by possibly tackling them. He knew there was a good chance he would die trying. Before the plane went down, he told his wife to have a good life and take care of their 3-month-old baby girl. In the end, United Airlines Flight 93 was the only hijacked plane that day not to hit a major target. Jeremy Glick, a hero who would not live to hear himself praised.
But there are also recordings of conversations between passengers and people on the ground during the course of the end of that flight.
Look, this was just a kind of fake evidence produced later to cover up the story. First of all, you have to understand that the mobile phone tower, the center of the mobile cell, cannot transmit the signal over 2 kilometers. So when you switch on your mobile phone, it will connect itself to the nearest tower within maximum 2 kilometers distance. So once a plane is flying at the altitude of, let's say, 8 kilometers, it's simply too far to reach any tower. It's more than 2 kilometers, 4 times as much. It's just not possible to connect your mobile phone to any ground tower. So it's just technically impossible. Any communication engineer will tell you that.
Dmitry, in the case of United Airlines Flight 93, crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. There were no engines, there's no tailplane, and when the coroner examined the scene, he said after 20 minutes there stopped being a coroner because there wasn't a body and there was no blood. Later reports are that part of the wreckage landed 3 miles away. How do you explain that?
First of all, I would like to stress that a main purpose of my book was not to explain about the planes or to disprove the planes or no plane theory. The main point of my book was that I used to serve in certain department of the Soviet military which knew about existence of the nuclear demolition scheme of World Trade Center.
Yes.
That is why my primary point was to explain this to public. But when it comes to the planes, it was just like a secondary thing which I was obliged to research just to complete the book. It was not the main point. That is why when it comes to the World Trade Center demolition, I knew it for sure. Because I really know it. I knew it from my former service, and I know how to explain the mechanics of the demolition. But when it comes to planes, I was obliged to use publicly available sources. So my opinion is just my private opinion.
Well, you express it in the book, why not express it?
Yes. Okay, so the point is like this. When plane falls down in result of anything, it usually falls down as a whole piece. So it should hit the ground as a whole piece and disintegrate while on the ground.
Yes.
If the plane was disintegrated in the air, that means something caused its disintegration there. It should be either a big explosion which tear plane apart, or we also can presume that the plane was shot with the cannons, because the cannon is rapid firing. And it might cut for example, the wing, or another wing, the tail, and the plane will just be disintegrated in the air. So the pattern of the plane collapse in the case of the Flight 93 suggests that the plane was shot down, and not by the missile, by the cannon.
Why not the missile?
Because you know that all modern missiles and all modern planes have so-called IFF identification, friend or foe. So whenever plane flies, it always transmits the signal, I am a friend, I am a friend, I am a friend. And no guided missile can lock on such a plane because it's own plane. So it's just technically impossible as a means of protection. So in order to shoot your own plane, you cannot use your own missile. You can only use cannon. And you know, if you read carefully all publicly available sources in regard to that September 11 events, especially in connection with the Flight 93, you will find some strange thing. One of the American interceptors, I mean the fighter's plane of the US Air Force sent to intercept hijacked planes, came back with entire cannon munition spent. And nobody can explain why they managed to spend the cannon munitions.
It wasn't on an exercise or anything like that.
They claim it was an exercise, but look, who will believe that that exercise took place in the middle of September 11 events? When all the flights were restricted and all fighter planes were sent just to ground or to intercept the hijacked planes, and nobody would conduct such an exercise in the middle of these events. It's ridiculous.
Or the people who attacked the United States in New York, shot down the plane over Pennsylvania, shot down the plane over Pennsylvania, shot down the plane over Pennsylvania, shot down the plane over Pennsylvania.
Now we come to one last feature, the hijackers.
Yes.
To have hijacked planes, you've got to have hijackers.
Yes.
And the FBI very quickly named 19 men. Flight 11, 5 gentlemen. Flight 175, 5 gentlemen. 5 on Flight 77 and 4 on Flight 93. In your book, you disclosed that of the 19 hijackers, in the case of American Airlines Flight 11, one of them's a Pakistan ISI agent, and 3 of them are found alive. In the case of United Airlines Flight 175, one's found alive, and one of them has an alibi thanks to the FBI. In the case of American Airlines Flight 77, 2 have alibis, and 2 are alive. And in the case of Flight 93, 2 are found alive, and one's a Christian.
Yes. And as you can see that these photographs, they were not composed by me, they were from the official report of September 11 Commission. That is the official photographs.
Yes. So it's your position that there are no flights, there are no planes hitting the World Trade Center, and there are no hijackers either.
But look, if the September 11 Commission confirms that these are the hijackers, and they were found alive, that is by default dismisses the entire report of the September 11 Commission as a lie.
Yes, it does.
Yes, that's why this September 11 Commission report has nothing to do with the reality. You don't need even to refer to it. It's just I don't know what is that. It's a piece of a poor concoction.
There's something else potentially seditious in what was published, because the interesting thing, all of these people, with the exception of one man, is a Muslim from an Arab country.
Even that the one who was Christian, they claim that he was a Muslim either. They just made a mistake. They pick up the wrong personality.
Well, there's one very interesting one, and that is this gentleman whose passport was found at Ground Zero.
Yes. This is probably acquitted him.
Yes.
Because everything was burned at Ground Zero and nothing was found except dust.
Yes.
But how come that the passport of that person was found there?
Unburned and intact.
So this is planted evidence. And this fact that the evidence was planted automatically acquitted this guy. It provides him alibi.
It provides him a very clear alibi.
Yes.
So is it part of your position that there were no flights and that all of these men are innocent and there's no evidence against them or evidence that they were ever involved?
I believe that not all of them are innocent. Probably this person who is an agent of Pakistani ISI is not innocent. He probably agreed to participate in this one.
This is Muhammad Atta, who received, just prior to the September 11 attacks, $100,000 transferred from the account of a senior official within the ISI.
Yes. And if the FBI really believe that that person is a hijacker, they should accuse the Pakistani Secret Service of supporting the hijackers.
Yes.
And proceed against them very seriously. But as you can see that the American FBI did not proceed against the ISI, which is that means the proof of their collaboration.
Well, there's more to it than that. They didn't even ask the general that sent the $100,000
yes.
why he sent it.
Yes, no question. But they're supposed to have this question. Why should that one of the hijackers receive funds from the Pakistani Secret Service?
Which are close allies of and work closely with the American Secret Service.
Yeah, they are close allies because that General Mahmoud Ahmed, the chief of Pakistani ISI, at the time of September 11, was in New York and he was having breakfast with one of the US senators.
That's right. So he was quite handy to question if they wanted to question him.
Of course. They can question him right on the spot.
There's something else odd about the hijackers, because we find conveniently a copy of the Quran, some luggage, and the vehicle left by one of the hijackers at Boston Airport. And it has conveniently suicide note.
But you know, any kind of planted evidence cannot be acceptable.
But if the American government have made a tragic decision, then they have to come up with some planted evidence to prevent it from coming out.
Of course, that is just a part of September 11 cover-up. Because after nuclear demolition of the World Trade Center, the American government was put in such a desperate situation that they could produce any kind of fake evidence just to distract the public attention from the real nuclear explosions. It's just as a part of the distraction.
But it's your opinion that what the American government did was reactive. They reacted to something that somebody else did.
Yes.
And so they weren't perpetrators, they were just cover-us up afterwards.
Yes. I do not believe that the American government was a September 11 perpetrator. I'm sure that it was a victim put in extremely desperate situation that has no other way than to be indulged in that kind of cover-up.
I understand. Dmitry, I have pressed you on the American position September the 12th, 2001 onwards. What would you conclude the various discussions between the American government and the Israelis, the American government and the British, and the American government and the French, and the American government and the Russians?
You know, it's not easy to answer this question. I could testify only to what I know for sure. And the most part of this book describes what I know for sure. As I promised, I explain in this book who did it and how he did it. So when it comes to the consequences, discussions behind closed doors is a mere speculation. I don't know, because I was not a witness of that. So we can only guess. Like I can guess that the discussion between American government and the Russian government primarily concerned where the Soviet-made missile with the thermonuclear warhead came from, and who should be responsible for that action. But still, I was not a witness to this discussion. But when it comes to the discussions between the Americans and French, and Americans and British, and Americans and Israel, I simply don't know. It's very difficult. I don't like to speculate. I like to say what I know.
Okay. But one thing that you said that you do know is that there's no relationship between 9/11, the tragedies in New York, and the Bali bombing, and any Al-Qaeda member, any representative of Osama bin Laden, any Muslim faction, or Saddam Hussein.
As you can see from contemporary documents available, even available for public use, the American government attempted immediately, still at September 11 noontime, to link Saddam Hussein to the September 11 perpetration. It's also described in my book. But strangely, if you read the official review of September 11 events, a report of September 11 Commission, Saddam Hussein has absolutely nothing to do with September 11. On the other hand, the report of September 11 Commission claims that Osama bin Laden and his so-called Al-Qaeda has something to do with September 11. Moreover, they even directly blame it on Al-Qaeda. But if you visit the official FBI website, and you look at the list of 10 most wanted, you will not notice that the FBI charges Osama bin Laden with September 11 perpetration, because the FBI admit they have no evidence against Osama bin Laden whatsoever. So it's a very complicated situation. The FBI claims one thing, the September 11 Commission report claims another thing, and the reality shows third thing. So.
Okay, but one thing's for sure, the consequences of 9/11 have spread across the world to Afghanistan and Iraq. Many Iraqis have lost their lives, and many Afghanistanis have lost their lives as a result directly of 9/11.
Okay, let's consider it more carefully. The FBI clearly stated that Osama bin Laden has nothing to do with September 11. At least they don't have any incriminating evidence to charge him as such. And as 10 most wanted person, he is wanted only for the bombings of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, but not for the September 11. But in the same time, as you remember that immediately after September 11, Americans went to war against Afghanistan, allegedly to capture Osama bin Laden in connection with September 11, which contradicts each other. It means the September 11 Commission report contradicts the FBI statement, and the actual war against Afghanistan also contradicts the FBI evidence. And when we talk about the war in Iraq, it's vice versa. The report of September 11 Commission does not link Saddam Hussein to September 11. Nonetheless, the Americans went to Iraq to fight and to look for the weapons of mass destruction.
Which in 8 years they haven't found.
Yes, because they don't have any. But still they are looking for it, as you can see. So this is very difficult to answer your question.
Okay. So Dmitry, can I ask you about this cavity after the event that's underneath what was the World Trade Center? What happens to it afterwards?
As you can expect, at first the cavities were filled with some liquid hot material, which resulted partly from the melted material, so from cooling down of the gaseous materials. And this extremely hot liquid materials will just retain some temperature for about a year. And eventually they will cool down and set as a solid matter.
Which explains the molten steel that was found 3 months afterwards.
Yes, because the 150 kiloton will produce a lot of energy, so it will be like a pot with a hot matter, which it takes some time to cool down. Can you imagine the 100 meters deep cavity filled with this kind of thing? It may take a year to eventually cool down.
Out still on the rubble, it's still, I believe, 1100 degrees. The guy's boots just melt within a few hours.
But here we are, 8 years on. Do I take it that it's been filled with some material?
Yes, definitely, because they have to fill it with something which first of all will prevent the radioactivity injuring the people on the surface. And secondly, they have to fill it anyways, because they can't afford to keep the cavity in the middle of the city, because it might cause collapse of some construction. It's dangerous, so they have to fix it anyways.
So what would they fill it with? Concrete, maybe?
I don't know. Probably. Maybe concrete mixed with something which will absorb the radioactivity. But I don't know, honestly.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Let's say that some people might doubt your explanations for the collapse of the Twin Towers and your explanations for what's underneath them. If one were to drill a borehole through to the external bottom part of the cavity, what would one find?
They would find the former materials that were firstly gaseous, then liquid, and then become solid, and it will resemble a kind of volcanic glass.
Volcanic glass?
Yes.
Okay, and if that...
Because you have to understand one thing. At the epicenter of the nuclear explosion, every materials were overheated to such an extent that they will lose the atomic structure. They will be transformed to plasma. So once these things cool down, it cannot be again steel or concrete. It will be just volcanic glass. Universal matter mixed with everything.
Right, but anybody extracting from such a borehole that volcanic glass and analysing it would find what?
They would find that it is a volcanic glass.
And it could only be produced in Manhattan.
And the volcanic glass is a state of material which was formerly a plasma.
Therefore, it could only, it proves...
It's a unique material.
Yes. So there could be no doubt as to what happened.
Yes, of course. And besides of all, I think besides of that volcanic glass, there would be some materials which will retain the radioactivity.
And that could be tested and the radioactivity identified.
Of course.
And then presumably it could be worked back.
Because all those materials that were evaporated and transformed to plasma, they were set as a volcanic glass. But simply liquid materials, they can retain the atomic structure as well as radioactivity.
Understood.
So once you get to this kind of material, you can test it for radioactivity and you will understand what is this.
Understand. Well, let's go back to your comfort zone and let's go back to talking about World Trade Center 1, 2 and 7 sites. because you express very emotionally in the book how upset you are that a New York City police detective, John Walcott, became ill.
You know, many friends of mine suggested that I should write this book a few years ago, but I was hesitating. It doesn't mean that I did not want to say the truth to the public, because whatever I knew about the September 11 and its perpetrators, I honestly reported to the American FBI, and they knew it long before I wrote this book. But they didn't take any action based on my information. They did not even try to arrest the real perpetrators. And eventually, when I found, it was accident. I just found the story of John Walcott somewhere in the internet. And it was said that he was surprised while working at Ground Zero that a certain FBI agent entered Ground Zero in the full hazmat suit, while the others who worked there, they were just totally unprotected. And he was just surprised, what's wrong with that?
And they're covered in duct tape and fully protected?
No, they were fully protected, you know, like a lunar-looking hazmat suit.
Yes.
You can fly to the moon in it.
Oh, and what kind of protection did John Walcott have?
Nothing. Probably the respirator made from the ordinary material, or probably nothing even like that.
What happened to him?
According to the published story, he got sick with the so-called leukemia, which is a typical consequence of the radiation sickness, which resulted in his bone marrow transplantation. And so that is the only way he managed to survive.
So he was the victim of radiation poisoning?
Of course, as many other Ground Zero responders who were there unprotected and freely inhaling the radioactive vapors.
And what happened to him afterwards?
Yes, I told you that he was so sick that it required a bone marrow transplantation to save his life, because his blood was not regenerating. Because the bone marrow is the first thing which is damaged by radiation usually. So when you see this kind of thing, that is the consequence of the radiation sickness.
It can't be anything else?
It can be anything else, but the bone marrow is the first victim of the radiation, always. It's the most sensitive to the radiation.
But he survived, didn't he?
He survived because of the bone marrow transplantation. He was lucky to get the transplant. But some other people were not so lucky, they just died.
And the quality of his life?
Look, when you get the bone marrow transplantation, you will be like invalid for the rest of your life. You have to take anti-rejection medicine, as with any other transplant. You have to cover your mouth not to accidentally get any infection, because your immune system virtually ceases to exist.
And so he'd have to live in his own home but not go outside because of his immune system?
Yes, as with any other transplant.
Okay.
It can't be called life, it's just like,
So when we look
existence.
at those pictures from space of vapors coming out of the debris of WTC 1, 2 and 7.
You mean
yes.
This, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ground Zero workers were inhaling those vapors.
Yes.
So why haven't we seen a story in the New York Times that 10,000 workers are all dead? What happened to them, and how would that be suppressed?
It's easy to suppress because when people get the radiation sickness, it's normally not acute, it's chronic. It will be apparent in the year or two, and it can reveal itself differently. Someone may have cancer, someone may have another kind of cancer, someone may have a blood disease or whatever. Just generally bad feeling, and whenever they go to doctor, the doctor can diagnose them anything unrelated to the radiation. It's easy, and we should presume also that certain doctors appointed to treat Ground Zero responders, they were part of the cover-up. They have to sign some non-disclosure contract because they understood this is radiation sickness, but they were ordered not to diagnose as such and just to create some story which is easy for doctors.
So how did John Walcott's story affect you? How did you feel?
I just feel very disgusted when I read the FBI agent enter ground zero in the hazmat suits.
Knowing what you knew.
Yes, they knew exactly what I knew. And they don't want to tell it to the others.
Okay.
That actually triggered me to write this book.
I understand. Let's go back to these doctors. There would be, they're our guys, they go to our doctors, and that doctor, when confronted with 1, 2, and then 10 or 20 people coming in feeling sick, you mentioned in the book that they'd feel sick the next day, maybe.
No. You don't have to mix up two different radiation sickness. There is acute radiation sickness, and there is chronic radiation sickness, which are totally different things.
Could you explain?
Yes, okay. The people can be subjected to radiation in two different ways. One way is like this. Let's say this is an atmospheric nuclear explosion, which instantly emits a big amount of ionizing radiation to every direction. And let's say that someone is standing in the open and he gets hit by the front of the ionizing radiation. So he will be injured by this radiation. But this event will not last long, because the ionizing radiation, which is coming from the hypocenter of nuclear explosion, is just a momentary thing. It doesn't last any second or 2 seconds, just very short time, once, that's it. So if that person at this time was hidden behind the wall, he would probably be saved. But if he is in the open, he will get the dose. So the strength of the penetrating ionizing radiation in this sense is measured in a special units, which for short they call it R, but in, like, I don't know how you pronounce it, Röntgens.
Renatogens, yes.
Okay, sorry, I can't pronounce it in that way. And once people get that number of radiation exposure, they cannot get it anymore, because this kind of thing doesn't last. So let's say in order to feel sick immediately, a person has to get 50 Röntgens. If it is below 50, you will not feel anything. It will damage your body, but you will not notice it. But anything above 50 will make you sick probably in next 2 or 3 days. And if you get 100 of it, you will feel seriously sick, also in 2 or 3 days, and you will probably need to stay in the bed for a few months. And if you get over 150 of this, you will feel sick also in 2 days or 3 days, and you may die, because it's considered to be dangerous.
Understood.
Not everybody will die, but it could be a big percent, 60-70%.
Right.
Depend on the general health. But some other people may recover. So if someone gets more than 200, it's a big chance to die, and 250 is considered to be a mortal dose. But the nominally mortal one is considered to be 500. That's just like guaranteed, at least according to the American classification. So let's say that someone is already got 50 Röntgens by being subjected to this explosion.
Yes.
And then he continued to remain in this territory, but the territory was radioactively contaminated by the products of nuclear explosion, like a radioactive dust,
yes,
or like secondary radiation. So this second effect is being called radioactive contamination. So radioactive contamination is not measured in Röntgens, but in Röntgens per hour, because it lasts a long time.
Yes.
So let's say that the strength of the radiation is 10 Röntgens per hour. So if someone stays there 30 minutes, he will acquire 5 Röntgens, in addition to this what he get already.
Right.
And this can be accumulated. So as you can see that these two distinct, this one factor and this another factor that you can obtain the radiation dose. So people who work on ground zero, they were never subjected to the first one, because there was no nuclear explosion in the open. It was underground, and all penetrating radiation was absorbed by the rock. So the people on ground zero were subjected only to the vapors which were coming from beneath the earth and probably deposited in some surroundings. And this level of radiation was measured in, as I say, that in röntgens per hour. It could be different. I guess that immediately after explosions, it was hundreds of röntgens per hour, maybe 200. And then the levels of radiation subsided in the first day, and then they subsided more and more and more and more, but they remained dangerous for a few months. It depends on how long time you spend on ground zero.
Yes.
So the American officials knew that the effects of acute radiation sickness would be noticeable immediately in the next few days, maximum 2 or 3. That's why they knew that they have to make some preventive measures to prevent the workers to obtain more than 50 röntgens of acquired radiation dose. That is why they issued them individual dosimeters, but they didn't say that they are dosimeters. They say that is a certain devices for control.
That kind of a mini Geiger counter.
Yes, it's like described in this article, and you can see in these photographs. It was a very rare article. I also mentioned it in my book. As you can see that someone admitted that during cleanup works on ground zero, there were some alleged
air monitors
attached individually to everybody in the morning, and which have to be taken from him at the evening for alleged recalibration. Okay, but look, it doesn't look serious. It was just individual dosimeters which were taken every evening to take readings from them and just to calculate the summary radiation doses for each worker. So once the officials appointed to secretly monitor the radiation dose see that someone is acquiring close to the digit that he will soon feel sick, they remove him under some pretext from ground zero. Let's say transfer him to some other ward, which is not dangerous in that sense. So they monitor it, and they never allow anyone to accumulate more than 50 röntgens. That is for sure. That's why no one in ground zero suffered from acute radiation sickness. But the chronic radiation sickness, that is another thing. As you know, that radiation has three main parts: gamma radiation, beta radiation, and alpha radiation. So the gamma radiation is a penetrative radiation.
Yes.
It will penetrate everything, including hazmat suit. So the hazmat suit cannot protect you from gamma radiation. It's the same way it will penetrate it.
Sure.
So all dosimeters used to measure only gamma radiation as the most dangerous. So let's say that there is a radioactively contaminated area, and some person came there with the dosimeter and he measured the level of radiation, which is 10 röntgen per hour. That is only for the gamma part, not for any other. So because when people go to work there using the means of individual protection, they have to count that the means of individual protection will not help against gamma radiation. So they still have to observe the safe dose.
Yes.
Okay. But it's not the same thing when it comes to alpha and beta radiation. Alpha and beta radiation, they are more dangerous than gamma, but they cannot penetrate the suit. And sometimes they cannot even penetrate your skin, because the human body is covered by the thin layer of the dead skin, which can stop the most dangerous alpha radiation. But when people work unprotected on ground zero, they will not be injured by gamma radiation, because they observe secretly the dosage of the gamma radiation. But the people will still inhale or ingest the radioactive vapor, which contains alpha and beta radiation, which will continue to irradiate them from inside the body. And this causes chronic radiation sickness. The effects will not be immediately noticeable, because it's a slow process. But slowly but surely, after 1 or 2 years, their body will be damaged beyond repair by the inner radiation. And this happened because they were not issued hazmat suits. But the FBI agents, they know this.
So John Walcott and his friends, at some stage, must have been sitting in front of a doctor who knew exactly what was wrong with him.
How they know? Because they were not informed that it was a radiation.
But the doctors, they know if they're treating you for a broken arm or radiation sickness, surely.
Yes, but they did not treat them for broken arm. They made some other story. They say, for example, let's say that someone gets blood cancer, and it apparently caused by the damage caused by radiation to bone marrow. But the doctor will not confirm that. The doctor will say that, oh, that caused by asbestos dust. So it's easy to escape.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's say that John Walcott and his colleagues have a reunion every year. And the first year's reunion after September 11, there's 100 people there. And then the next year, there's 96 because 4 of them have died of cancer. And the next year, there's 86 because another 10 have died of cancer. The story would start to come out somehow.
Yes. That's why now there is a big story in New York. These people who suffer from this kind of thing, they try even to sue the government, claiming that the government did not properly inform them about the danger of asbestos dust or some like benzene or whatever.
Yes.
Anything but except radiation.
And your position is that all of them are suffering some form of radiation sickness from the...
Yes. It's an apparent chronic radiation sickness because it was ground zero after all. It's the place of nuclear explosion. And they work there, and they begin to work there in the first few days, totally unprotected.
Yes. But let's say that's continued because over a period of time they redesigned the sites and other people came into work. How long would those vapours continue for? I know the fires underneath continued for 3-4 months. As you said,
there were no actually fires underneath. There was not fires. They were just extremely hot material.
Molten steel?
Not only molten steel, molten rock, anything molten, but not fires.
Okay.
But because it was extremely hot, it was presented to public as underground fires. But there were no.
Okay. Because you said it's gone from thousands of degrees. There's nothing to cool it down quickly, so it lasts a long time and the burning steel. But how long would the vapours last? How long?
The vapours would, as long as it is hot, it will just release some vapours.
Okay. So anyone working there, even a year later, would still get some form of...
Probably not a year. I believe that in 5 or 6 months they managed to cope with it because they put some efforts to curb the radiation.
They sealed?
No, first they used some special chemicals mixed into the waters of firefighters.
Yes.
And they used the firefighters to pour these waters into the cavities. So it minimized the exposure, but not much, I believe. But at least it cooled down a little bit, the matter. So if in natural conditions, if left on its own, it would cool down in maybe 1 year, because they were trying hard to cool it artificially. Maybe they succeeded in half a year.
These vapours wouldn't just affect ground zero workers and police and fire department officials. Would it not also affect Manhattan residents?
Of course they would affect Manhattan residents.
Okay.
But as far as I know, that Manhattan residents from the dangerous area, they were evacuated and not allowed to come back for another 6 months.
Well, yes, the ones that were immediately affected.
Yes,
certainly.
They were not allowed to return until 6 months plus, which is still short. They should be away for at least 2 years, not 6 months.
Okay. Well, let's say that some of them returned within 6 months, and let's say that Mrs. Green or Mr. Brown inhaled some of this radioactive vapours and became not chronically sick but felt unwell. They wouldn't go to the specially prepared fire department's doctor. They'd go to a doctor, their own private family doctor, who they know very well, George down the road. And wouldn't he know exactly what was wrong with them?
Not necessarily. Why he should?
He's a doctor. They've got radiation sickness.
The doctor is not necessarily a specialist in nuclear explosion and these kind of things. He's just a doctor.
Okay. Well, if that
what doctor saw is the symptoms, he doesn't see the cause.
Okay. Well, if that doctor has half a dozen people from Vestey Street, which is just off, and they've come into him with the same symptoms, wouldn't it occur to him, wouldn't one suppose, to say, just hold the phone here, there's something wrong?
I don't think so, because the doctors, they also read newspapers and also they have some internal instructions. So let's say that certain doctors receive some circular which says that all people who live around ground zero were affected by asbestos dust. So the doctor should believe that. It's easy to cheat people, including doctors.
Yes. Yes. All right, well, let's talk about more about the medical impact of the radiation, of the radiation, the vapors coming from the ground. They were seen from space, and in fact identified.
You're talking about?
I'm talking about the shots from oversaw that saw these vapors for some time, and you observe in your book that they're not black smoke.
No,
they're
because
white.
it's not smoke; it's a vapor.
Right.
It's white.
You also observe hotspots in precisely the three places where you say nuclear devices were activated. One under WT7, yes, we have it.
But this is not my observation. I just found it published at the internet by someone else, and I thought that yes, the hotspots, as you see, they exactly correspond with the position of nuclear devices.
And in fact, they record temperatures way exceeding the temperatures created by burning kerosene weeks afterwards.
Yes.
And your position is that there's no other explanation for those hotspots being where they are.
You cannot create such a high temperature, 100 meters below the ground, that could sustain itself for a few months, unless you use a thermonuclear explosion of over 100 kilotons. What else it could be? Where you can get such a big energy to sustain these temperatures for such a long time?
In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have here the 9/11 Ground Zero Energy Report. And this was recently published, but it does actually reach the conclusion, interestingly, the same as you. And I'll quote from it. The huge vertical particle plumes briefly left behind where the towers had stood moments earlier offer mute testimony to the fact that solid floors did not sequentially pancake downwards. That would have taken significantly longer, been far less destructive, and appeared far different from what was observed. Clearly, this hypothesis that a sequenced vertical array of directional low-yield thermonuclear devices was used to annihilate the World Trade Center skyscrapers top to bottom. Forgive me. It's not an easy thing to prove. It should be easy to disprove if it's significantly off base. Yet it remains standing as the basis for the only explanation to account for all the most phenomenal ground zero evidence. So here we have some physicists agreeing with you.
Yes.
And we have a groundswell of sites coming up saying 9/11 truth, loose change, other experts, doctors of physics coming forward and saying there's something wrong here. And each of those is heading towards the conclusion that you draw in your book. That must give you some comfort.
I don't even know how to answer this.
If the evidence were unsupported by anybody or anything else, and you just published this book and announced to the world, I know what happened and I know who did it, they would laugh at you if nobody had drawn the conclusions that you've drawn, that the 9/11 Commission report is wrong, doesn't address and answer questions that you've answered, and other people are reaching the same conclusions.
Yes, of course. There are a lot of people who attempted to search for September 11 truth independently, and they arrived to similar conclusions as mine, with the one difference. They did not know for sure that there was a nuclear demolition scheme of the World Trade Center, while I knew it for sure from my former service in the Soviet military. That makes the difference. So it means they were guessing, and they arrived to the same point. But I didn't need to guess, I know it for sure.
But there's something else that makes your book unique. And we'll come to that later, but that is that you are going to name the perpetrators of the 9/11 tragedy.
Yes.
Thank you.